And US President Donald Trump says he would support Kurdish fighters launching an offensive in Iran, quote, if they want to do that, he said. The comment came after a site belonging to an Iranian-Kurdish opposition group was targeted in northern Iraq. The Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan advocates self-determination for the Kurdish minority. A drone struck the group's building in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region. No injuries have been reported, and US media say that Washington has been in contact with Kurdish groups in Iran and Iraq. Right, well, let's go to Victoria Taylor, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq and Iran in the US State Department and is now the Director of the Iraq Initiative at the Atlantic Council, joining us live now from Washington, D.C. Thank you for speaking to us here at Al Jazeera. Now, I believe Iraq, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is the only country in the Middle East that's sort of been targeted by both sides in this current conflict as the war nears about a week now. Why is Iraq feeling the heat exactly?
Well, I think that's to be expected. Anytime there's a conflict between the United States and Iran, unfortunately, Iraq is really usually dragged into it. Of course, Iraq is very vulnerable to this conflict because it is host to a number of Iran-backed militias. And in this case, you have the U.S. striking militia targets, and then the Iranians striking, as you noted, the Iranian-Kurdish groups that are resident in Kurdistan. And so this all creates a very complicated situation for the Iraqi government, which really still does not have control over all of the security in its country.
Right. And how can these joint Israeli-US war that's happening on Iran affect Iraq? Is this a case of what happens in Iran never stays in Iran exactly?
Well, I think the problem here is really the presence of the Iran-backed militias that are in Iraq. And of course, the supreme leader, before the conflict was very clear about what Iran's intentions were should the U.S. or Israel strike. And the supreme leader indicated the goal was really to escalate and expand the war throughout the region. And so in that context, it's not a surprise to see groups like Hezbollah, like the Iraqi militias, begin to start striking targets. And we know that when the U.S. is struck by these militia groups, it's not going to hesitate to strike them back. And that's what we have happening right now.
So does that mean you do think that there is a chance that, certainly Shia groups would perhaps copycat Hezbollah and join in?
Well, we already see that. In fact, those groups have already launched attacks into Jordan and to Kuwait, and they're continuing to launch some drone and rocket attacks on the U.S. military position that is in Erbil Air Base in Kurdistan.
So to ask you, you said Jordan and Kuwait. Is that to hit U.S. assets there?
I'm not sure how accurately they're actually hitting, but I think the goal is certainly to try to hit U.S. targets if they're able to. But as we've seen throughout this conflict, part of the goal is also just to increase the pain throughout the region in hopes that Iran can outlast the United States and Israel, and that perhaps some of the regional countries will push the United States to stop the striking.
And how much influence does Iran have specifically on Iraqi politics? And would it serve perhaps as an opportunity to rearrange the entire political landscape there if Iranian influence on Iraq is weakened in the coming weeks, months, or however long this war will take?
Well, I think we already see a little bit of this happening. In fact, since in the post-October 7th era, of course, Iran has been weakened regionally. And while it retains quite a bit of influence, both on the political sphere and military sphere, economic sphere in Iraq, I think we're already seeing some differentiation between the various militia groups. Some barely respond to the Iranian direction at this point and are becoming more driven by their own Iraqi interests, their interests in the political space, their interests in the economic sphere, rather than being completely guided by ideology. And so I think this is an opening and an opportunity for the Iraqi government, particularly in Baghdad, to try to take steps to move the country in a direction that serves Iraq's own interest and begins to create more space from Iran.
Right. And one last note I wanted to pick up on, which we were mentioning before I came to you with this interview, Victoria, is the Kurds. Now, media certainly has been reporting that they are backing a Kurdish group in Iran. What we do know is that Trump says he supports these Kurdish fighters launching an offensive. In fact, he said if they want to do that. Now, do you think they would act? The Kurdish groups have denied being there, certainly from Iraq, but do you think they will act without a guarantee from Israel and the US, being both the ones that started this war, for protection?
Well, I'm not in contact, unfortunately, with any of the Iranian opposition groups. Of course, I think we've seen, even though these opposition groups have long been divided, they've taken steps, in the past week to unite under one umbrella. And I think that's a sign that they're trying to see what opportunities there may be to push forward their agenda and push forward for greater rights for the Kurdish people within Iran. There's quite a bit of reporting suggesting that there may, in fact, be an effort, whether it's backed by the United States or by Israel, to provide some weapons to the Kurds. I think this would be a very complicated picture. They're not large in number, and they're unlikely to really gain a lot of support in non-Kurdish areas of Iran, even if they're able to enter the country. And at the same time, I think we've seen strong signals from the Iraqi Kurds that they will not do anything to facilitate such an effort, just because of the own risk that they will have for Iranian retaliation.
Right, so many questions up in the air still, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks very much for speaking to us, Victoria Taylor there.